Thanks for joining us for a webinar that should take about 45 minutes or so to discuss the SBIR and STTR programs. My name is John Ujvari. I'm with the Small Business and Technology Development Center and part of our Technology Development and Commercialization team. So again, thanks for joining us. Just to let you know, we will take questions and answers at the end. You can type in your questions using the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll take those at the end. So if you'd save your questions until the very end of the presentation, that would be great. I'll read those off and answer them as I can. So let's start off by talking a little bit about what in general the SBIR program is. As stated by the Small Business Administration, which oversees the program is a non-dilutive federal funding mechanism to help small businesses develop and commercialize innovative solutions to existing problems that the federal government is interested in, and those problems present a significant market potential. So the underlined and bolded words are the key takeaways about this program, and they're really the unique aspects of it compared to many other funding mechanisms that exist from the federal government. Again, number one, it's non-dilutive funding, meaning that it doesn't have to be paid back, and the government's not taking an equity stake in the intellectual property that you develop. It's specifically for small businesses. Okay, you must be a small business entity to apply for and be awarded this type of funding. It's to commercialize innovative solutions. Okay, and commercialize is the key word in that phrase. It's to develop innovative solutions that have a significant market potential. Okay, so this is not general or research funding for conducting general science experimentation. It's funding for conducting research for the sake of developing novel, innovative technologies. Okay, so there are very key differences between this mechanism and, again, the many other mechanisms that the government funds. So let's talk about some numbers and the history of the program. Federal agencies that have over $100 million in R&D funding, okay, that's specifically extramural R&D funding, they're required to set aside a certain percentage of that funding into the SBIR pool on an annual basis. About $2.3 billion was available in 2017. Since the program started back in 1983, over $18 billion has been awarded through 70,000 unique awards. Okay, so quite a long history. The program's also had a significant economic development outcome as it relates to employment growth within small businesses. Over 1.5 million people are currently employed by companies that have received SBIR awards in the past. And 1 in 9 companies have gone on to attract equity financing. And that's a really important ratio in that the general ratio for companies that attempt to secure equity financing is much worse than 1 in 9. And the reason that companies that have gotten SBIRs are much more likely to go on to be successful in attracting equity financing is that this SBIR funding adds credibility, okay, credibility for the technologies that you're developing, and thus those follow-on financing entities will look at you much more strongly. STTR, sister program to SBIR. STTR stands for Small Business Technology Transfer. Okay, it's very, very similar to SBIR, but there are some key differences that we'll talk about over the next couple of minutes. STTR, the goal of that mechanism is to facilitate cooperative R&D between small businesses and US-based research institutions. which you can think of in general terms as U.S. universities. 0.45, so almost 0.5% of the funds that, from agencies that have over $1 billion a year is set aside. Okay, so there are only 5 agencies that have that $1 billion plus extramural R&D funding budget. They have to put 0.5% of that aside, and that equates to about $220 million annually. So a much smaller program compared to SBIR. In that, SBIR was $2.3 billion. STTR is about 1/10 of that size. So when we talk about these two funding mechanisms, we need to think about what is the end goal. What's the end goal of the research that you hope to accomplish using SBIR and STTR funding? The end goal of this research is to develop a novel and innovative product or solution, okay, that fulfills a significant agency or public need. Okay, so in other words, the end goal of these funding mechanisms is to develop a commercializable, sellable technology that fulfills some major market need that the agency has an interest in and the public sector has an interest in as well, and that they'll fulfill some need. So both programs are broken into 3 separate phases. In most cases, you must follow this 3-step cycle or 3-stage process. Phase 1 is funding of roughly $150,000 to $225,000 for you and your business to carry out concept development, proof of concept, feasibility studies, and the like. Phase 1s generally last about 6 months in time. They can extend to 12 months of time. Okay, it's up to you to determine what that timeline for you to carry out that type of research is going to be. Win rates are about 1 in 5 to 1 in 6. Okay, so 15 to 20% in general. If you're successful in proving feasibility of the research in phase 1, you're eligible to submit a proposal for a phase 2 award. And the phase 2 award is focused on prototype development. Okay, so further developing the results that you generated in phase 1. Field testing, okay, working out the bugs of the technology so that hopefully by the end of that phase 2, you've got a complete working prototype in hand. So generally phase 2 lasts about 24 months. Funding is generally about $1 million to $1.5 million, and award rates range from 35 to 40%. Upon completion of the phase 2, it is now up to you, the small business entity, to take that finished working prototype out into the marketplace. Okay, and that's, in other words, commercialization. And in most cases, there's no additional federal funding to assist with that commercialization process. And as a result of that, oftentimes there is a need for follow-on equity type funding or partnership funding or even debt funding can come into play. And it's up to the small business to make that funding happen for that commercialization phase. Okay. So there are some differences as it relates to this 3-step process. Some agencies do offer what's called a direct to phase 2 mechanism. So NIH is one of those agencies that offers that mechanism. And that simply means that you skip the phase 1. And it's often for projects that are a little bit later stage, whereby they've already proven feasibility for the technology they're developing. and they're really at the stage of prototype development, field testing, etc. Okay. A couple of other agencies do offer that mechanism as well. NIH also offers what they call a fast track mechanism, whereby you submit a proposal, one proposal, that incorporates both phase 1 and phase 2 work at the same time. Keep in mind that in the phase 2 proposal submission, in addition to the research plan that you're focused on, the agencies will also require a complete, usually 10 to 15 page commercialization plan to be submitted. And that's often a very significant scored component of your phase 2 proposal. So the commercialization plan can be thought of as a business plan or a plan to get that product in the marketplace that's focused specifically on that product that you're developing. Win rates can certainly vary from one project to the next. On average, again, phase 1s are 15 to 20%, phase 2s 35 to 40%. And a lot of people ask, well, is SBIR and STTR, are their win rates different? And the answer is not really. It can change from one year to the next. But even though STTR is only a tenth of the size of SBIR, the win rates are about the same. And the reason for that is simply because you don't have as many submissions, proposal submissions, for STTR as you do for SBIR. So here in one table are the key differences between SBIR and STTR. And hopefully at the end of this slide, you'll have a good idea of which of these two mechanisms is going to be a better fit for your situation. Okay, so let's kind of recap what we discussed. Who participates? Okay. Agencies that have over $1 billion a year in extramural R&D funding are required to participate in SBIR. There are 11 agencies that fit that criteria. Only 5 in STTR. And in our next slide, we'll discuss which agencies actually participate. An institutional research partner, meaning a university in most cases, is not required to participate or collaborate with a small business in an SBIR. But in an STTR, a small business must collaborate or must have a research partnership with the small business. Okay, university, small business collaboration is required there. The principal investigator status. So in an SBIR, the principal investigator must be employed by the small business. And what that means is that the principal investigator, and that's the person who's going to be the most credible scientific or technical expert on the team, that person must be at least 21 hours a week employed by the small business, okay, to be eligible. In an STTR, that's not the case. The principal investigator does not have to be majority employed or 21 hours or more a week employed by the business. Okay. Since there's a collaboration between a small business and a university and an STTR, the STTR enables the principal investigator to be majority employed by the university that the business is collaborating with. Okay. Now, one exception is the National Science Foundation. They do participate in STTR. However, their requirement is that the principal investigator still must be majority employed by the business. Budget, 3.2% of those 11 agencies are required to be set aside, and that equates to $2.3 billion. STTR, about 0.5%, equates to $220 million. Okay, and then let's talk about budget allocation. Okay. In an SBIR, the small business who's awarded the funds must expend at least 70% of the awarded funds. Up to 30% can be outsourced or spent or expensed to another party. STTR, at minimum 40% must go to the small business, at least 30% to that research partner, and then another 30% can be outsourced. Okay, so that STTR allows flexibility between three parties if you wish. So let's talk about two scenarios. One that covers SBIR, the other that covers STTR. In scenario one, the small business can, not must, but can subcontract up to 30% of the work, and that 30% is based on dollars in the phase one, and all the way up to phase 50% in phase two. Now, this subcontracting in an SBIR can be to a university, it can be to another small business, it can be to a large corporation. It doesn't matter. Okay, so if the situation arises where you don't feel that you need to subcontract any of the work, you don't have to. Okay, so but up to 30% can be outsourced to any entity that you wish. In scenario two, in an STTR, the small business who's awarded the funds must subcontract at least 30% of the work to their partner university, and then another 30% can be subcontracted to any entity that you wish. And that can include the original university that you're partnering with. Okay. So the goal or the benefits of subcontracting are several. First, it's potentially adding key team members to your project that you wouldn't necessarily have access to otherwise. It may also bring to the table equipment, facilities, etc., that you may not have access to either. Okay, so oftentimes subcontracting, although it can bring in some logistical issues to partner with an entity, it can add some significant benefits, and that's looked on very positively in the review process. So what is the small business? How do you define who or what the small business is that's awarded the funds? Okay, so there are some eligibility checkpoints, if you will, that defines what that small business must look like. First, as we've mentioned before, the small business is the entity that always submits the proposal and is always going to be the awarded entity of the funds. The small business must be a for-profit entity. Okay, it can't be a nonprofit or a not-for-profit. Okay, it can be an LLC. It can be incorporated. Okay, so neither of those is a requirement, or it's a requirement, but it doesn't matter if you're an LLC or S corp or a C corp. The small business must be at least 51% owned by individuals. Okay, this is a relatively new requirement, new being about 10 years old. The basis for this is that they, being the Small Business Administration who oversees the SBIR and STTR programs, they want to see that the small business is majority owned by individuals, such that that's proof that it's not per se a large or a subsidiary of a large corporation, or owned by a partner, a large partner company, etc. And the small business has to be under 500 people in size. So you might be thinking, well, geez, I'm only a 2 or a 5 person company. How am I possibly going to compete with a company that has 495 people? Well, the answer to that is that companies that are on the upper echelon of that 1 to 500 person scale Larger companies, number one, are often not as innovative as very early stage companies. Of course, they're innovative, but perhaps not as risk-taking in their innovations. And this is exactly what SBIR and STTR is looking for, is high-risk technology research to be carried out. And number two, you can assume that a company that's on that larger end of the scale is likely going to have other sources of funding, perhaps through revenue generation, or they might be a public company, et cetera, that they can draw from. They don't necessarily have to rely on SBIR and STTR funding anymore. And one more point, over 50% of all awards on an annual basis are made to companies with under 10 people in size. Okay, so it is truly funding that is going to the small players in the entrepreneurial space on an annual basis. So here in one slide is an overview of the 11 agencies that participate in SBIR and the only 5 that participate in both SBIR and STTR. You can see, simply based on the names of the agencies, that there is going to be a significant array of interests, of technical and R&D interests among all of these agencies. And even more interestingly, as you delve into each of these 11 agencies, there's an extremely broad area of interest within them, within each individual agency. So as you're thinking about which of these agencies might have the most interest in what you're doing, don't judge the agency simply based on its name. You would be very, very surprised at the array of interests within the Department of Defense. Simply not development of weaponry, etc., but think of all of the needs that the Department of Defense has across all of the things that they do, from energy production to vehicles to aircraft to healthcare. Lots of interests. And the same goes with all of the other agencies. So keep an open mind as you're thinking about which of these 1 or 2 or 3 might be a really good fit with what you're trying to accomplish. So here are those 11 agencies, or at least showing the agencies that have the most funding. You can see that Department of Defense puts in about 1/3 of that $2+ billion a year. Excuse me, that number is incorrect. It's about 43%. HHS, which includes the largest component, NIH, is about 33%. NASA, NSF, DOE are about 7 to 8%. USDA, 1%. All the way down to Department of Education, which is about 0.5% or less. Okay, so you can see that the array of funding levels of R&D across those 11 agencies varies pretty drastically. So just based on the size of the pieces of the pie here, this is going to tell you how many individual proposals that each of these agencies is going to accept on an annual basis. So some key points in terms of the principal investigator. Okay, the principal investigator, again, that's the person that's going to be the most technically adept, kind of the scientific research expert on the submission that you make to one of these 11 agencies. The principal investigator is not required to have a particular academic degree, if you will. Okay, what they are going to require via proof in their CV or bio is very very deep technical understanding and expertise and research background in the area that you're looking to get funding in. So for example, all engineers are not created equal, right? If you have a mechanical engineering degree and you've been focused on that for the past 20 or 30 years in your career, that engineering degree may not be a good fit for some other biomedical type engineering area of expertise that might be needed. So make sure when you're looking at who you're going to be selecting as the principal investigator on a particular project, that his or her background very much aligns with the type of work that you're going to be conducting in this phase one proposal that you submit. Proposals or applications can be submitted to different agencies for similar work. So if you found an area of interest at Department of Defense, and you also found a similar area of interest at the National Science Foundation, you could submit a proposal to receive or to propose funding for that same work from two different agencies. Okay. However, if you're lucky enough to get funded for both of those agencies, you would have to decline one of them. Okay, so you can only get funded once for doing a particular project. However, you can submit multiple proposals to the same agency or different agencies for different work that's not duplicating each other, and you can receive multiple awards. Okay, so that's something that we often suggest is you're looking to this funding mechanism for your business to look at it from the long term and try to use this mechanism over and over and over again so that it can assist you in developing a menu of different products over time. Okay. So there are a lot of companies out there that do exactly this. They learn the process, they learn the ropes, they learn how to develop a strong proposal, and they may go ahead and submit, 2 or 3 or 5 proposals a year. And with a 20 to 30% win rate, they might be awarded 2 or 3 a year. And again, those multi-awarded companies are getting awards for conducting non-duplicative work, not overlapping work. Each of those proposals is going to be leading to its own end commercializable product. So the budget, we talked about phase ones ranging from $150,000 to $225,000. Those maximum budgets do change from one agency to another. Okay, that's why there's a range of $150,000 to $225,000. That total request that you're going to make is going to be included in a budget submission that incorporates 3 different sections. The 3 sections are direct costs, indirect costs, and a fee. So direct costs are going to be expenses that your project is going to incur that are directly attributable to that project. For example, salaries of the employees who are directly involved in the phase 1 research, supplies that are being purchased for use in that phase 1 project, and perhaps equipment. In most cases, it must be under $5,000 in price to be incorporated as a direct cost for a project. But salary, supplies, equipment, those are the 3 main buckets of direct costs that are going to be incorporated into your project. The second bucket is considered indirect costs. So indirect costs incorporate expenses that your business incurs no matter if you had this project or no matter if you're carrying out this research or not. So think of these indirect costs as utilities, lease expenses, fringe benefits, etc. So expenses that your business is going to incur that are helping your project proceed forward, but they're not directly aligned with it. Okay? Most of the agencies will allow you to earmark or put 20 to 40% of that total funding that you request into this indirect bucket. Okay, so if you're asking for $200,000 in your total request, $40,000 to $80,000 can be incorporated to cover those indirect costs. Once you receive your phase one award, your first phase one award, the federal agency will come back to you to what's called negotiate this indirect rate with you. So when you submit your proposal and you submit your initial budget, you will calculate a percentage, and then after it's awarded, they'll come back and make sure that that percentage is as accurate as possible. And with that, you can then use that negotiated indirect rate going forward in future phase one and phase two submissions. Okay. The third bucket that is incorporated into that total funding request is what's called a fee. You can think of this as a profit margin. So those 11 agencies will allow you to set aside 7% of your total request to go towards a profit margin. This is a unique aspect of this funding mechanism. Most other government funding mechanisms don't necessarily incorporate a profit margin. This funding can be used for expenses that are not related to the research and development that you're carrying out. So there are a lot of expensive things that your business is going to incur as you proceed through the R&D process, like intellectual property protection, okay, patents, trademarks, trade secrets, etc. So legal expenses. You're going to have accounting service expenses. You're going to have perhaps market research expenses, business development expenses. Okay, all of those things are not necessarily research and development. They're considered business expenses. So this 7% can go toward coverage of those. Okay, so in wrapping up the budget section, you've got direct cost coverage, indirect cost coverage, and a profit margin. Oftentimes, that funding that you request for a phase one is not enough to actually sustain your business in the long run. There's likely going to be additional funds that need to come into play to help your business live over the 6 to 12 month period of time while you're carrying out your phase one. Oftentimes companies will say that the phase one is a money losing proposition. They often put a lot more time and perhaps supplies, equipment into place just to carry out and accomplish their phase one objectives. Okay, so keep in mind that that is the case, and it's a risky endeavor. However, your goal is to then move on to the phase two, which is a lot more money, a lot more fee or profit margin can be incorporated. Okay, so you kind of have to work toward the light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. So if SBIR and STTR funding appears that it would be a good mechanism for you based on your interests and the stage of your business or the type of research funding that you need, your next step is going to be researching the solicitations that those 11 agencies offer. Solicitations, you can think of those as RFPs, or requests for proposals. A website called SBIR.gov is often a good first destination for you in your search for potentially matching solicitations. So here's a screenshot of the SBIR.gov solicitation search page. And circled in red on the left side are links for open solicitations, future solicitations, and closed solicitations. And you can see that you can search by keyword, just like any search engine. So let's talk about actual search techniques. Imagine for a second that your technology perhaps is something that the Department of Defense may be interested in. Perhaps it's a novel coating for jet aircraft engines that perhaps deflects radar better than other coatings that currently exist. So that's your idea. That's your goal for getting funding. Department of Defense offers 5 solicitations a year. Okay, they have an opening and a closing. So if you search right now, you may not find any open solicitations at the Department of Defense. Okay, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't proceed any further. That simply means that let's look at other mechanisms to figure out what DoD's interests have been. Here you can search for closed solicitations. So in that red circled area, you click on the closed link and search by keyword the area of interest that you have, aircraft coating, radar deflecting technologies, etc. And that will draw up all of the areas of interest that the DoD has had over the last 10 years or so. Okay. So there you can see what they have had an interest in funding over the recent past. That doesn't mean that you can submit a proposal for those closed solicitations. That just means that they've had a recent interest in that. And it's likely that they still have an interest, perhaps a little bit different than the one that you're looking at in the closed solicitations. They may still have an interest in that technology space in the next round of solicitations that they have that will open. Okay, so if nothing is open today, do a search for closed solicitations. The link for future solicitations offers an overview or a sight into the future of what are the release dates of solicitations for agencies coming up over the next 6 to 12 months. Okay, so you would see in there that DoD, for example, would have a release coming up in April, for example. Okay, and you would set that in your calendar and come back in April to look at what exactly their topics are then. Okay, so open and closed solicitation searches are very key. Okay, so SBIR.gov covers all of those 11 agencies. Once you start to get a feel for a particular 1 or 2 or 3 agencies that really has a feel for, really has a match or an interest in what you're doing, then you can start drilling down further within that agency. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. Another link that I would like to point out on this SBIR.gov page, in the middle of the menu bar at the top of their page, is a link for searching of awards. You can click on that, again, do a keyword search, and that will pull up awards that have been made since the beginning of the program based on keyword. For going back to our original example, radar deflective coatings, you could search for that, and that would show you all of the small businesses that have been awarded projects for that type of technology work. You can see the contact information of those companies, where they're located, the email address of the principal investigator, as well as the abstract, the 500-word description of what their phase 1 or phase 2 proposal was all about. Okay, so that abstract is the only piece of the proposal that will be made public. Okay, so if you're awarded a phase 1 or a phase 2, you don't have to worry about your entire proposal being published and being made known in the public sector. Only that abstract is made available. So based on that, you can use that to your advantage at this point to see, number one, how a good abstract is written, but also who potentially your competitors have been awarded projects like that. The last thing I'll note about looking at awarded companies is that you can also look at them as potential partners. Don't just look at them as competitors or people that you're going to be working against as you develop a technology, but look at them as potential partners. Okay. Remember that in both an SBIR and an STTR, you can outsource some of the work to an outside entity, okay, another small business or a large business. Okay. Perhaps some of those previously awarded companies might be beneficial to your project, so keep that in mind. So as we mentioned, as you've started to whittle down which agencies you think have an interest in funding your type of work, you can start to drill down and look specifically at different agencies. So here's a screenshot of NIH's areas of interest from a couple of years ago. They call it their omnibus SBIR STTR solicitation release. Interestingly, NIH releases their solicitations in June of each year, and it's open all year long. Okay, they don't have a open and close period like DoD that I mentioned earlier, where they have 5 open and close periods throughout the year. NIH opens in June, and they have 3 deadline dates throughout the year, September 5th, January 5th, and April 5th. And you can see in this solicitation documentation, they break their topics down by the 26 different institutes within NIH. Okay, so you can start drilling down within each of those institutes. Similarly, at the National Science Foundation, they've broken down their areas of interest into various what they call directorates, whereas NIH, they call them institutes, and NSF calls them directorates. Okay, so these are different departments within NSF, and they offer usually between 8 to 10 different broad topic areas on an annual basis. NSF is an agency that offers 2 releases of solicitations each year and then 2 submission deadlines each year. So generally solicitation releases are in April and have a deadline of June, and again opening of September and a deadline in December. So they offer you about 3 to 4 months of proposal preparation time. NIH and NSF, their topics and solicitations don't change much from one release to the next. Those 2 agencies are considered grant-based agencies. And what that means is that, again, topics don't change much from one year to the next. The topics themselves remain quite broad, meaning that a lot of different novel ideas, a lot of different interesting technologies that fit that general area of need that they've presented in their solicitations can fit into the topic areas. Okay, so what they call that is peer-initiated research. or investigator initiated research. So they're putting out a call for really interesting, cool, innovative ideas to come in to the table to solve a particular problem. Whereas Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and others are considered contract agencies. Contract agencies are the exact opposite of grant agencies. They offer solicitations that are extremely specific. Okay, they've identified a very specific problem area that they would like a solution for, and they're looking for you to come in to provide that very specific solution to them. So if your area of technology development is not well aligned with what DoD, for example, is asking for, you shouldn't submit a proposal because there's no chance that you would get funding from them for that. Okay, so very specific and very general solicitations are something that you're going to come across as you do your initial searches. So once you've narrowed down and drilled down into one or two or three of the agencies and have identified some specific topics, you've identified which institute or directorate or branch of DoD, for example, that those topics live in. The next step is for you to communicate with the program manager. Okay. The program manager is the person that is overseeing from kind of a logistical, programmatic standpoint the topics that you're reviewing. Those program managers are not going to be the reviewers of your proposal, number one. They are not the authors of the solicitations that you're reviewing. They're simply there to kind of guide you through specific questions that you may have as it relates to proposal submission, proposal development, etc. Okay. The key here in that conversation with the program manager should be, or your goal of that conversation should be, is my area of technology a good fit? Is it a strong fit? Does it align well with what the agency is looking for? Okay, that should be the end goal of your communication. The best way to start that communication is through an email, a very brief overview of who you are, what your business is doing, your area of technology, and a request for a call, and perhaps one or two questions that you would like to discuss with them. Okay. Oftentimes, you won't get a response from the program manager, and that's not because they don't want to communicate with you. It's simply because they're very, very busy, and really there's maybe one program manager for, we'll say 5,000 proposals that might come in. So they're getting a lot of emails, a lot of communications coming their way. So don't let that stop you from trying again. Send them another email, send them another email. So you have to be perseverant when it comes to that. And some program managers, you'll get an email response back immediately. So they're human. Everybody is going to operate a different way, but try the best you can to make that initial email communication and have that follow-up call. The worst case scenario, and we see this around the country quite a bit, is that a small business will think, just based on the solicitation that they've read, that they have a really good chance of getting funding. And they figure, well, what's the point of me contacting the program manager? I don't have time, or I just don't like talking to people, what have you. And it could be that if they had that conversation with the program manager, that they would have gotten this really golden nugget that they can incorporate into their proposal. Or on the flip side, the program manager may say, well, this really doesn't fit with what we're looking for, but Bob down the hall, he's in a totally separate department, and I'd like you to talk to him because I think Bob has a really interesting set of needs that your technology might fit into. So if you didn't have that call in the first place, you wouldn't be introduced to Bob. So take some time, make that phone call early. So when you submit your proposal is going to go through what they call an administrative review process first, to make sure all of the forms that you were supposed to submit were included in your package of submission package. Once it passes through that administrative review process, it will be farmed out to generally 3 reviewers. Those reviewers are, in most cases, they're not the program manager. And in grant agencies, they are your peers. Okay, they're not agency employees. In grant agencies like DoD, DOE, etc., they are actually researchers within that agency, but again, not the program manager. So 3 reviewers, and each of these 3 reviewers is going to come from a different background. Okay, the first reviewer may come from an academic setting with a very strong academic research background. The second reviewer may come from a small business or corporate business development background, okay, but they're still very adept at the technical and the science aspects of your research. And the third is likely going to be somebody with not necessarily a very strong scientific background, but more focused on commercialization and business development. Okay, so you're going to have 3 actual human beings looking at your proposal, each coming in with kind of a different set of expectations or a different set of needs that they would like your proposal to have incorporated into it. Okay, so very strong academic person, somebody with a business yet science background, and a business development focused person. Okay, and you can think of them as referees, if you will. Right? Some of them are really going to like your proposal. Others, may find some weaknesses that the other 2 reviewers, didn't really care about or didn't come to mind. So as your proposal goes through that review process, you'll get a score. And the way the scoring works is that the lower the score, the better. Okay, generally the lowest scores that we generally see are in the high teens, okay, 17, 18, 19, and those scores can go all the way up to 45 or 50. Sometimes your proposal won't be scored at all, simply because the reviewers found major gaps and they said, well, this proposal has no chance of being funded, so we're not going to score it. So the results of that proposal review can be focused or can be scored and unscored. Lower the score, the better. Each topic or each solicitation area is going to have its own kind of set aside dollar amount that they have available to dole out for each solicitation period. So as the reviewers come together, they'll sit down into a review committee and they'll start discussing the lowest scored proposals first, and discuss up to the point where they kind of run out of money. And where they run out of money and the proposal scores that align with where they run out of money is called the pay line. So scores that are below the pay line are funded. Those that are above the pay line are not. So just to let you know that pay line is kind of the cutoff terminology. So those reviewers are going to be looking very closely at 5 different criteria. Okay? And the agencies provide these criteria and the requirements of these criteria to those proposal reviewers. And if your proposal is scored, you will, and it doesn't matter if it's funded or not, if it's scored, you are eligible to receive review comments, written review commentary back from the reviewers. And those review comments are something that you need to request. So if you get an email, down the road after proposal submission, and that could take, 4, 5, 6 months of time before that proposal review happens. Once you get that email stating that your proposal was scored, you can wait a little bit of time, and then again, no matter if you're funded or not selected for funding, you can request those written proposal review comments. And those review comments are going to revolve around these 5 different criteria, and they are significance, innovation, approach, team, and environment. So the first is significance. Okay, and significance, and again, these are kind of the 5 main components of your proposal submission. Those 5 areas of need. So significance first is explaining to the reviewers what is the pain point, what's the pain in the marketplace or the pain that the agency is experiencing. Okay. Who cares about that pain, right? How important is the problem? And with that, you're discussing what's the market. Okay. So here, even though the agency is published the solicitation where they define what the need is or what they expect the need is, you need to explain to the reviewers what the need is, because those reviewers weren't the ones that wrote the solicitation in the first place. So you need to educate those 3 reviewers about why is what you're doing, why is this technology you're developing so important, what's the significance of it. Review criteria number 2 is what's the innovativeness of your novel technology? How is it different than existing solutions today? Is it novel? Is it brand new? Is it untested? Is it better, faster, lower cost than competing technologies today? Does it have intellectual property potential? Intellectual property is going to be the value that's generated out of the work that you're carrying out. So explain to the reviewers that yes, this work that we're doing, these results that we're generating from our technology development process, they're going to be protectable, and there's going to be intellectual property associated with it. And keep in mind that the agencies do not want to see incremental improvements. They don't want to see simply tweaks to existing technologies. They want to see novel, high-risk, big change type of work. The third review criteria that reviewers are going to be scoring is the approach. Okay, what's the blueprint associated with the 6 or 12 months of work that you're looking to get funding for? Is the research plan clear? Do you have set milestones? Have you incorporated a timeline and attached that to the milestone-driven activities? And do you have supporting data, okay, that supports where your research is going to start? Okay, preliminary data, if you will. Okay, so the approach is kind of the what is the work that you're going to be doing, and have you clearly identified what are those steps and what are the outcomes. The fourth criteria is who are the investigators and who are the team members that you've combined and put together to carry out that blueprint. Okay. Those investigators and team members, again, especially the principal investigator, must have technical expertise that aligns well with whatever the work that you're conducting is in this phase 1. The reviewers also like to see that these team members, especially the principal investigator, has not just technical expertise, but research management expertise? Have they received other grants in the past? Have they received, perhaps not grants, but other funding in the past? And that shows that they're able to manage a funded project. Okay? And have you put together other kind of outside, perhaps less, quote unquote, important team members that may not be spending a lot of time on the project, but are still playing an important role. So a good example is a statistician. You may not need a statistician incorporated into a phase 1 or phase 2 proposal for maybe more than 20 hours, but at the end of the research, you may need to do some statistical analysis. So have you put those kind of ancillary people in, or put them on the team to have them available as needed? And fifth is the environment. Where is all of this work going to be done? And do you have the tools? Do you have the toolbox to carry out all of the work that you plan to carry out in that blueprint? Right? Do you have adequate facilities? Do you have a wet lab space if you need such a thing? Do you have the adequate computers? Do you have the software, etc.? And a lot of people will ask, well, do I need to have all of these things in place at the time of proposal submission? And the beauty of this is that no, you don't need to have them all in place. You just need to have all of these pieces identified and ready to go at the time that the project is funded. Okay, so the agencies know that if this is your very first project and you don't have much funding available at the business right now, you're not going to have facilities today at the time that you submit a proposal. You're not going to have all of your team members employed. You're not going to have a lot of things, but they want to see that in your proposal, in the story that you're telling them, that you have all of the pieces of this puzzle ready to go, ready to put together at the time that they score your proposal well and decide to fund you. So as you can see, this whole process is a big maze, especially the first time you're going through it. So what we're here to do at the SBTDC and within SBTDC, my team, the Commercialization and Technology Development team, we're here to guide you, right? We know this is difficult. We've been here for many years, and we've worked with hundreds of companies, hundreds of proposals, and have worked with all of those 11 agencies. And we're here to guide you through that process. Okay. What we don't do, however, is write the proposal for you. Consider us as advisors or counselors or teachers, if you will. We're here to guide you through the process, let you know of challenging things before they arise. Okay, we're here to let you know what's worked well in the past, what hasn't worked well, okay, etc. So at the SBTDC in North Carolina, we offer one-on-one counseling to North Carolina headquartered companies. Okay, so we're available to have one-on-one phone calls with you, sit-down meetings, to talk business development, grant strategy, provide guidance, review proposals prior to submission. And with that, we ask that we get those draft proposals at least 2 weeks before the deadline that you submit to the Fed. And we're more than happy to provide referrals to other SBTDC services, including our general business counselors, our international business development team, our government procurement counselors. And outside of the SBTDC, there are a plethora of other economic development